Aroldis Chapman is headed to the Boston Red Sox. And how does this move exactly impact the Pittsburgh Pirates?
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates, every single day. My name is Ethan Smith, your host of the Locked On Pirates podcast, bringing you your news, analysis, opinions, and reactions to everything going on in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates from a lifelong fan to lifelong fans just like you. Today's episode of Locked On Pirates is, of course, brought to you by the wonderful people over at Game Time. There's Penguin games going on. There's Steeler games going on. So if you want to look for tickets for any sports event or even concerts, comedy, theater, and more, make sure you head over to Game Time right now and get some awesome deals, including $20 off your first purchase with code LOCKEDONMLB. So the Pittsburgh Pirates have yet to really do anything of what I would call big magnitude so far this offseason just yet. But we do have something in the realm of the Pittsburgh Pirates that is affecting this team going into 2025, and that is, of course, Aroldis Chapman heading to the Boston Red Sox via free agency. Really, when you look at Aroldis Chapman and the kind of year that he had, very Aroldis Chapman year, I would say. Nothing really out of sorts on the side of why Aroldis Chapman was who he was. We all know what kind of player Aroldis Chapman is. We knew exactly what we were truly getting when we got Aroldis Chapman here, and had a pretty good season. Now, I know a lot of people are probably wondering, well, why didn't the Pirates bring him back when the price tag was pretty much the same as it was last year? Of course, the Pittsburgh Pirates made the very shocking decision to bring in Aroldis Chapman, at the time at least, for $10.5 million, which a lot of people have kind of scrutinized a little bit, because that $10.5 million could have went to plenty of different other areas rather than the bullpen. But he eventually ended up being the closer on this team. He was a phenomenal pitcher late in games, and he was just really one of those players that you look at and say, okay, we could trust that guy in big spots. There were those moments, obviously the I called them Aroldis Chapman moments, where you knew that he was going to struggle, or he was going to get the bases loaded with 2 outs and then do the stare down after a 103-mile-per-hour fastball up and inside on somebody that you just can't hit. So these are all things that we figured. Now he heads to Boston, 36 years old, going into his age 37 season, $10.75 million. So they go $250,000 over what Aroldis Chapman got last year. The impact of this move directly, I think, is interesting, because when you look at this Pittsburgh Pirates team, a lot of people, including myself, are going to say that the bullpen needs some work, because it was a unit that going into the season last year was expected to be one of, if not the best unit as far as the back end of the bullpen was concerned in Major League Baseball. It was expected to be a top 10 unit, with David Bednar, Colin Holderman, and Aroldis Chapman as a 3-headed monster closing out games. It just never materialized. David Bednar obviously never really got a healthy year, being hurt in spring training, and it just kind of going through the entire season and him having the most struggles he's ever really had. Colin Holderman, same deal, dealt with injuries, dealt with struggles all throughout the season, especially in August. And then Aroldis Chapman was kind of that steady presence, stayed healthy most of the year, was giving the Pirates exactly what they expected. But as far as the impact with just the bullpen goes, you are now going to have to replace a guy like Aroldis Chapman. Now, that's not something I think a lot of us thought we would have been saying a year or 2 or even 3 years ago, but you do have to replace what Aroldis Chapman was giving you, and you can do that in a number of ways, obviously. You can do that internally. You can do that externally via trade or via free agency. Internally, I think, is probably the easier option, because when you're looking at this bullpen right now and what is available, you have David Bednar. I think Bednar will be the closer going into 2025. We'll talk about that at a later date if it is announced as such, because I don't want to just jump and say that he is. but I would imagine that he will be, as he should be, because I do think that David Bednar will have a massive bounce back season in 2025, especially if he can stay healthy. Then you have Dennis Santana, who was a very, very big surprise for this team in 2024, became one of their more reliable bullpen arms from August on in the second half of the year, and really not a big name, but was very consistent, was very good, was finding ways to get things done, was really molding himself into a guy that later in games you could actually kind of trust to put in Dennis Santana and know that you're probably exiting that inning with the score being the same. And Colin Holderman, much like David Bednar, I think Colin Holderman is one of those bounce back candidates that we could see in 2025. Just a weird year for him, because let us not forget that David Bednar and Colin Holderman were two guys that were just dominant in the back end of that bullpen in 2023. Colin Holderman, of course, at the top of the league in holds. David Bednar was top 5 in saves. I mean, when those guys came into the game in 2023 and the Pirates had the lead, the game was over. And that's what we expected in 2024, adding Aroldis Chapman to the fold, is that it would be either Chapman, Holderman, Bednar, or Holderman, Chapman, Bednar. And if the Pirates had a lead, that was that. Well, that didn't end up being the case. And then you look at some of these other guys that you can really look at and say, okay, maybe these guys can help fill that role. Carmen Mlodzinski, Kyle Nicholas. Those are two guys that I think we really fully expect to take a next step at some point. Then you, of course, have Joey Wentz and Peter Strzelecki. Those guys obviously are not of the caliber to really replace what Aroldis Chapman was doing for this team. And then another interesting player I want to throw out there. Now, I don't know if he's going to be ready right away, but Johan Oviedo could be used as a long relief arm, or if the Pirates want to, they could use him in kind of a setup role. They could use him late in ball games for an inning, because we know that Oviedo has the velocity. We know that if he can control his pitches, he'll be just fine in doing that as well. But I do think that you can expect the Pirates to make a bullpen move or two of some sort to try to replace Aroldis Chapman here. And we'll get more into the financials of this and why I think that it's a great decision that they didn't pay Aroldis Chapman nearly $11 million again. And you look at some of these other guys as well, like Dauri Moreta, I think is an interesting player that you can look at. You're looking at guys like Johan Ramirez, JC Flowers maybe making an impact eventually as well. But I do think moving on from Chapman is a good idea. You're talking about a 36-year-old reliever that, truthfully, I mean, what were you signing him to? Another one-year deal? And if the Pirates get into the trade deadline season again, do they make the same decision to hold on to him again, depending on where they were? And do you, again, really want to devote that much money to him? But again, I need to pin that point and get to it later. But as far as the bullpen is concerned, it is a need for this team after 2024. You want to solidify it along with this strong starting rotation that you have that, to me, is only going to get better. But those starts don't matter if they're going 6 and 7 innings, and then when they leave, the bullpen is just handing the game to the other team like we saw a lot in 2024. So we don't want to see that. So you have to go out via free agency, maybe even via trade, and get some of these guys that could be valuable pieces that can help replace Aroldis Chapman. Now, again, I do think a guy like Colin Holderman can just go ahead and replace Aroldis Chapman naturally and organically. You could see a guy like Kyle Nicholas or even a Carmen Mlodzinski kind of step into that role as well. It's just a matter of, do we have the trust in those guys to do that? Same thing with David Bednar being the closer. That's still a question mark also. I could say all I want that I think David Bednar is going to be the closer of this team and have a bounce back season, but that doesn't guarantee it. So that is a question mark for this team moving forward. That is something that has to be in the back of their mind. And with Chapman leaving, that opens up a gap here in this bullpen where you start to wonder, okay, who's going to move up the ladder and who's also going to take that next step that the Pirates need in that bullpen for this unit to really be a solid unit in 2025, which they absolutely need to be a competitive team in 2025. That is the bullpen aspect of it. I do want to talk about the financials of it, though, because, again, I do think that this was a good decision by Pittsburgh not to make that much of a financial commitment to Aroldis Chapman, and I'll explain why next on Locked On Pirates. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Make sure you download the Game Time app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply because Game Time Picks is a new feature from Game Time that makes getting tickets easier for your favorite live events. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Game Time Picks allows you to curate and make it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. All-in pricing allows you to see your total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, and your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. It could be a Penguins game. It could be a Steelers game. It could be a show you want to go see. It could be your favorite comedian, your favorite singer coming into the city of Pittsburgh that you want to see. And all you have to do is put in code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off and download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. And welcome back, everybody, to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. Make sure after this show tonight that you listen to Locked On Red Sox. They'll be talking all about the Aroldis Chapman signing as well over there as we are here. And also make sure that you listen to Locked On MLB, where Paul Francis Sullivan is, of course, covering everything you need to know about baseball's offseason, from Juan Soto to even the small moves that are going on and likely to be going on here in Pittsburgh. So we already talked about the impact that this has on the bullpen and why Aroldis Chapman departing via free agency to Boston impacts this bullpen in a weird way, because now the Pirates are going to kind of have to replace him and find a way to make up for what Aroldis Chapman was doing for this team, of course, in 2024. When you look at the, to me, more important aspect of it, though, which is the finances here, the Pirates did, of course, contribute a lot of money to Aroldis Chapman this past year, and it kind of threw people off, and it was what he was worth. And again, clearly what he's worth now. He got about $250,000 more to go to Boston this offseason, and I'm sure Boston was not the only team that was ponying up $10+ million for the services of Aroldis Chapman. Let's take a step back and wonder, okay, why would the Pirates not just match that offer and bring him back? Well, you look at some of the other needs on this team, and yes, I've already said that the bullpen is a need of this roster. It absolutely is. But you have to consider that the other needs that the Pirates have, like outfield, like first base, potentially even shortstop, maybe even third base, those are going to cost money. And we know historically that money is something that the Pirates don't exactly go out and spend willy-nilly in free agency. So to tell me that you would commit $10.5 to $10.75 million on a 36-year-old reliever versus maybe going to go get a Tyler O'Neill or a Ha-Seong Kim or Max Kepler or a Jock Peterson, I would be pretty upset. Now, in a perfect world, the Pirates do both of these things. They go maybe bring a Chapman back for 10.75, and then they spend the rest of the money where they need to elsewhere and don't really have any questions left in the offseason. But that's not the world we live in, folks. That's not the Pirates that we know and love. They're not going to go out and spend $80 to $90 million in free agency, let alone $10.5 million on a 36-year-old reliever that, again, albeit had a very good year with this team. He did. He was very helpful in what this bullpen was able to do and was a bright spot in that bullpen as well. It's just a matter of, would you, and I want to hear your comments on this, would you have been comfortable with the Pirates giving him $10.75 million to come back for another season when there's absolutely no guarantee that the Pirates would spend much more beyond that. Now, I'm not saying that the Pirates won't spend beyond that. They absolutely will. I do think you're going to see them go out and get an outfielder. You're going to see them go out and get a first baseman. You're going to see them go out and get a bullpen arm, maybe even via trade. Those guys are going to eclipse that $10.75 million number, but to then add it on top of that would just be something historically that we just really haven't seen this team do. Let's remember that Francisco Liriano signing way back when for 3 years, $39 million was the largest contract that the Pirates had ever handed out to a free agent. That in itself was about $12.5, $13 million a year, if I'm doing my math correctly. So you're already talking about that being the biggest one. Then you would want to contribute $10.75 to Aroldis Chapman. Now, I'm not going to sit here and discount what Aroldis Chapman would have meant to this team coming back in 2025 if he would have. He would have been a very useful commodity again. He would have been a trustworthy back end of the bullpen guy. That's what he would have been. That is exactly what he's going to be for Boston. Boston needed the help. They're going to get it with Aroldis Chapman. But Boston and Pittsburgh are also on different wavelengths with how they construct their roster financially. Now, I know we're all going to hear about, or I'm going to hear, well, the Pirates could spend this and that. And I understand that they can. They just choose not to. And that is a whole different conversation. But to me personally, I think contributing in committing to nearly $11 million on a 36-year-old reliever would have been a travesty. No doubt in my mind that Chapman is a good pitcher. But now with that $10.5 million or $10.75 million, you could go and get 2, maybe even 3 valuable bullpen arms in free agency. Or you can bring in a guy via trade that's not going to cost you that much in prospect capital that could maybe amount to the $4.5, $5 million number that could be as good, if not better, than Aroldis Chapman. So I do think the finances play a massive part in this because I know, like, you're probably thinking, Ethan, why are you so up in arms about the finances of not signing Aroldis Chapman to $11 million? Well, the reason why is there's other needs on this team that can now be filled with that money. Much like last season, when they did that, when they did sign Chapman to $10.5 million, at the time, I was wondering, okay, why didn't you give that to Carlos Santana, who had another good season at first base? Why would you not give that to a potential starter, not knowing what Paul Skeens and Jared Jones would turn into, and then what Bailey Falter and Luis Ortiz would contribute this year? And that's what the Pirates can do now by not making the decision to bring back Aroldis Chapman. They could say, okay, we're going to make sure now that we have that almost $11 million to spread the wealth a little bit, to go get a guy like potentially Max Kepler or Jock Peterson or a Tyler O'Neill or a Christian Walker or any of the plethora of bullpen arms that will be available in free agency. The Pirates have now entrusted themselves to do that. And with winter meetings coming up on Monday, which, mind you, programming note, Gary will be back on Monday for Gary Morgan Monday to talk all about winter meetings, because I'm sure we'll get plenty of Pirates news from those days, and we will be here to cover all of it. But with this Chapman decision, I mean, again, it's not really a decision per se, because obviously the Pirates couldn't really do anything about it. He was a free agent. What were they going to do about it? But at the end of the day, I think it's okay. And who's to say the Pirates didn't throw their name in the hat? Maybe they did. Maybe they did throw their name in the hat to try to get Chapman to come back. And if they did, that's fine. I just don't think I would have been comfortable with committing that much financially to Aroldis Chapman, considering that with this loop around, he may have been traded at the deadline anyway. much like we thought this past year that he might get traded at the deadline anyway. So that's where I think the full circle analysis comes in on this with this Chapman move. And I'm going to get some more thoughts in about what the Pirates can do to construct this bullpen into a solid unit in 2025 to cap off this episode of Locked On Pirates. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, there's so much to bet on in sports right now, like basketball, hockey, college football, college basketball, anything you could think of. But of course, you have the NFL. So get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same place where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and an official sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network. Alrighty, everybody, and welcome back to the final part of today's episode of Locked On Pirates here on the Locked On Podcast Network. To my everydayers, thank you so much for tuning into the show as you always do. If you're new, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Listen on all of your podcast platforms, including YouTube. Comment, like, subscribe, whole 9 yards. Helps me out a lot, helps the network out a lot, and helps me warm up with this cold weather. And with the Aroldis Chapman thing that we've been talking about all day today, I do want to kind of boil it down to one more thing. So full circle analysis here is one, Aroldis Chapman was pretty good with this Pirates team in 2024, which earned him another $10+ million contract with the Boston Red Sox via free agency. Those are all true. Aroldis Chapman is still who he is. He's going to give Boston exactly what he gave Pittsburgh this year. He's going to be a phenomenal back-end bullpen option for that team, a fireballer. He's continues to just defy the odds as far as not ever really being hurt with Tommy John and still throwing the ball as hard as ever to this day. The biggest thing that I think I could take away from all this is one, what I've already talked about, One, the financial aspect of it. I'm happy the Pirates didn't pony up $11 million again. I'm just rounding up, but I'm happy they didn't pony up that kind of money again to Aroldis Chapman. I just don't think it would have been worth their while. I don't think it would have been something that would have been highly beneficial, just because I think it would have kind of held them down a little bit to what they could do in free agency and via trade. And the second one goes back to a point that I made a couple of times, that when Aroldis Chapman signed with this team in 2024, I think a lot of people expected him to be traded at the trade deadline, no matter where this team was. Now, this team was in a competitive spot at the trade deadline. They obviously bring in Brian De La Cruz, who they non-tendered a few weeks ago. They bring in Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, who will be with the team next year. They bring in Jalen Beeks, who, whatever. I was very interested that the Pirates didn't move on from him at the deadline. Seeing that Aroldis Chapman, of course, was a one-year guy, you expected him to just be a rental. And the reliever market was very favorable for teams that were selling relievers and very expensive for teams that were buying them. We even saw that with the Pirates a little bit as far as getting Jalen Beeks and getting rid of Luis Peralta, who actually made some pretty decent outings with the Rockies while he was there. So that was what I found intriguing, was that Aroldis Chapman didn't get traded at the deadline. Now, there are a lot of factors that go into play with that, because obviously Aroldis Chapman was a massive part of this bullpen. Colin Holderman just fell off a cliff. David Bednar wasn't useful. Injuries abound. There was a lot going on. But I still think they could have managed it. And yeah, he was helpful when they were a competitive team. But my thought process before the season is my thought process now. They could have been a competitive team without him. And they can be a competitive team without Aroldis Chapman. I know that him signing elsewhere is going to kind of sting for some people because he was their arguably most consistent reliever, which is saying a lot about where the bullpen was in 2024. But again, to all the points I've made before, I just don't think I would have been comfortable with the Pirates ponying up nearly $11 million to keep him here when he'd probably just get traded at the deadline this time around anyway. And you can find and navigate ways to make this bullpen better without Aroldis Chapman at a cheaper cost. I mean, the Pirates can absolutely do that. There's nothing stopping them from doing that. We know the bullpen is a clear need. We know the bullpen will be a point of emphasis this offseason, hopefully. We know the Pirates are going to be looking to make the bullpen a point of emphasis. They didn't have to bring Aroldis Chapman back to do that. And especially at that price tag, they can find reliable, valuable options via the bullpen in free agency and trade that are going to cost astronomically less than Aroldis Chapman. And I want to end today's show with saying I actually appreciate what Aroldis Chapman brought to this team in 2024. He was one of the bright spots of this team in 2024. He was actually very fascinating to watch on my team. I always thought that he was fascinating to watch anyway, but as far as him being with the Pittsburgh Pirates, I thought he was very fascinating to watch. You never knew what was going to happen. And there was a beauty in that. And the stare down in a Pirates uniform, something I'll never forget. I think Aroldis Chapman being a Pittsburgh Pirate was awesome. I think it's something we'll remember going into 2025. But I do think if they do the right things with taking care of the bullpen, you'll be okay with missing out on Aroldis Chapman. Folks, thank you so much for tuning into this evening's episode of Locked On Pirates here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. My name, again, is Ethan Smith. You can find me on Twitter at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates. Find the show on YouTube and all of your audio platforms because it is free and available to you every single day as a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Folks, we'll be back tomorrow to discuss anything else going on with the Pittsburgh Pirates because I'm sure something will come up between now and then. But until then, we'll see you on the flip side.